Hey Gene, how's it going?
All right.
So I got a very specific question for you today.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you about Leroy Yarbrough. I know he was a very famous NASCAR driver and won a Triple Crown, I think, in '69, and then just kind of disappeared. And you and Ronnie have a little bit of history, and I'd be curious to hear your take on this story.
Sure. Yeah. Leroy he would have probably been like Dale Earnhardt, before Dale Earnhardt, probably as big as Dale Earnhardt. Leroy was a special driver. Richard Petty said about Leroy Yarbrough, they raced Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, and Leroy in the 60s. The 70s was different. Richard Petty, it's in his book. Richard Petty said Leroy Yarbrough was wide open. He had one speed. Like I tell people, my friends, I say, Leroy Yarbrough either won the race or he lost it. He was wide open. None of that Brian back off like they got back then, and the more hard rubber tires, not like these sticky glue down tires they got today. There's a story that I tell people that they can't believe it. It's in this book. I'll quote it to you about Leroy Yarbrough doing 240 miles an hour on Daytona Speedway in 1960. It's in the book. I'll find the date. 65, yeah. I'll tell you that story. And we grew up together. Leroy was about 10 years older than me and Ronnie, but we loved to watch him race. And back then, as kids, I want to be a race car driver. I'll get bigger, be like Leroy, But and there's an article in this magazine too about him and Ronnie, and it's an honor to be a part of this book. My name's not in here, of course, but Ronnie's, and talking to Leroy's story. I was right there, right in the middle of it. And here's one for you. 63, when the black guy, we thought he was black, but he was actually biracial. His daddy was no white moonshiner and his mom was black, from Virginia. 63, I think. And I tell the story, and I've told the story for years. Oh, and here you go. Recently, within the past month, NASCAR awarded his family in Danville, Virginia, Scott family, Wendell Scott family, a trophy for winning the race, because in 1963, when he won the race by about 3 or 4 inches. And Julian's sidekick went, "Damn, Julian, I got to phrase this right. That Negro won the race." Julian said, "No, that Negro didn't win the race. He came in second. He ain't kissing the white queen." And so they gave the race to the other guy. But technically, actually, truthfully, Wendell Scott, the black guy, won that race. And NASCAR just awarded his family a trophy for winning that race 50-something years later, But that's a true story. And we all knew that back then because we were there, as kids. And I believe that story is in this magazine, and I'm not sure. But we go way back, and Leroy, I'm not going to read some of the stuff that's, don't need to be out there. I think when he won the Triple Crown, he took his crew all around South and North Carolina at all the whorehouses and partied. And so he went camping, and he got bit by a tick. Just let it go. Don't worry about nothing. Got bit by a tick. So his downfall over the years, mental decline, severe mental illness, come to find out, was from a result of the tick bite. He got Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and years they misdiagnosed it. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, what was going on. Junior Johnson, he was racing for Junior Johnson, driving for Junior. Junior spent $250,000 taking Leroy to hospitals, places, trying to find out what was wrong with him. When they finally diagnosed it, it was way too late. He was mentally ill. He was just mentally ill, you know. And he was put into the mental institution out at McClinney. And everybody in Florida knows where McClinney is at. And not everybody in McClinney is crazy, but most of them out there are. And I'm going to read some of this stuff to you and tell you this story, because a lot of people, when I tell the story, they don't believe it. They don't believe it. And I tell them about 1965, Leroy Yarbrough. I can't think of the guy's name. It's in the book. Dodge sent him a 65 Coronet 426 Hemi, Ray Fox. And they said, we want you to set a speed record with this car. So they fuel injected, supercharged the engine. And so at Daytona 500, Leroy Yarbrough is going around Daytona in that truck, and he smoked the tires mostly all the way around the track because he had over 1,000 horsepower. And so he, wide open, going around the track, and they clocked him at 240 miles an hour in 1965 on those damned old hard rubber street tires, not like them glue down tires they got today. And he come out of the second turn, going into the third turn, smoked the tires. And they flicked the caution light on because they thought he'd blow the engine. He was just smoking the tires. So he coasted across the track at well over 140 miles an hour, coasting with the engine turned off. So he was clocked at 240 miles an hour. I think it was 240. Was it 280? It's in the book. Hold on a minute. I want to make sure of this. I think it was 240 miles an hour. And then he come across after he turned the engine off, I think at 180 miles an hour. Hold on a minute. Okay, let's see. 19, okay. Oh yeah, here you go. Ray Fox and Yarbrough had moderate success, but the pair is perhaps best known for a publicity stunt that took place in February 1965 at Daytona International Speedway. Dodge, in one of many manufacturer disputes with NASCAR, had pulled out of racing, but supplied Fox with a 1965 Coronet and told him and Leroy to take it to Daytona and set a closed course speed record. Fox supercharged the Hemi V8 and added fuel injection and a bag of drag racing tricks, including a big air scoop and a hunkered down body. With close to 1,000 horsepower, Leroy spun the rear tires practically all the way around the dusty track. Then went on reportedly to clock 240 miles an hour on the straightaway. Then settled for an official speed of 181 miles an hour, a record. Then could have gone faster, but Leroy heard a sound that he didn't like from the front end. Click, 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 and he pitied it was a big bolt embedded in the tread of the right front firestone. The front page photo of the Daytona Beach Evening News the next day showed a dimpled, smiling Leroy pointing at the bolt lodging the tire. Leroy began to get offers to drive better cars, and finally a call came at late '67. Car owner Junior Johnson, by then retired from driving, thought he could do it better than his current driver, Darrell Derringer, and gave Yarbrough a slot. Then things went well, and during the practice on board, fire extinguisher went off and blinded Leroy, so he crashed the car in that race. And she's reading that one. Well, anyway, it goes on about all the races he won, the money that he won, and it says here, then in 1970, the wheels started coming off Johnson Yarbrough juggernaut, in part because sponsorship factory support was waning. Yarbrough ran just 19 races with one lone win in Charlotte, and only then because most of the top cars had crashed. In 1971, Leroy ran only 6 races, none after that, and he wrecked Dan Gurney's Eagle in 1972 on the Indianapolis 500 track, and that was a bad crash, and he got bumped up on the head. I need to finish all of this. Let's see. Anyway, Leroy Yarbrough, I think it was 69, won the Triple Crown, the 500, the 400, and the Southern 500. And that's when he went and was bit, camping, was bit by the tick. But here it says, as we growed up, we watched Leroy race, and we wanted to be like Leroy. Cars were a passion. When he wasn't hanging around Tommy Moon's neighborhood garage, he was working on his cars in the front yard, where helpers included neighborhood kids who watched through the fences as he raced at Jacksonville track. One of those neighbor kids intended to follow Leroy's footsteps into auto racing and would tell his friends that he would someday be as famous as Yarbrough. He was correct, but it was to be in a different field. Ronnie Van Zant was the founder and leader singer for the band Lynyrd Skynyrd. He was just 29 when two members of the band died in a crash in '77. That writing is not quite right, but it was 4 members actually. There was always racing around Leroy's house called Yarbrough's younger sister. She still lives in the neighborhood. So the sad story is that Leroy would have been one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time if he hadn't got bit by that damn tick, and would have been diagnosed early on. And not long after, this article was written in 1980. In 1984, I was walking through the neighborhood, and I seen him walking in the ditch, the same ditches I used to pick up Coke bottles as a kid. He was picking up Coke bottles. I drove by him, I went, damn, that's Leroy. I backed back up, I said, Leroy, it's Gene. He looked up at the ditch, and he had 2 bottles in his hands. First words out of his mouth was, Gene, I'm sorry about our old buddy Ronnie. I said, yeah, man, that's just terrible. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to get me some damn drinking money. I need some money. So I started to give him $20, but I figured that might be too much. So I gave him $5, and he threw them bottles down and hauled ass to the little store down there on Plymouth to get him something to drink. And it wasn't long after that he was asking his mother for some money. She got her check before he got his check. And he got in an argument, fight with his mama, and then they took him back to the mental institution. That's where he died at. And they think that he either had a stroke, possibly, or a heart attack. They don't know. But he fell and hit his head on the sink, and it did a severe head injury. And before the staff found him, he had bled out on the floor, and he was dead. You know, horrible, tragic death of Ronnie Van Zant and Leroy Yarbrough. You know, but he would have been as big if he ever. Richard Petty said he was wide open, had one speed, and it was wide. It was wide open from the dirt track all the way to Indianapolis 500 or 200 or whatever they were back then, and it's Daytona 500. I think there's only been 2 people. It's in that book, I'm sure. Only 2 drivers to ever win the Triple Crown. One of them is Leroy Yarbrough. Bill Elliott might have been the second one. I can't remember the second one, but there's only 2. Leroy Yarbrough was one of them, and it come from right there in our neighborhood, right on the streets where we grew up as kids. Great stories, but it's sad stories, you know. And that I contribute that article to Car and Driver, October 8th, 1980 edition. So I'm not copywriting, I'm not stealing nobody's writing.